It happened in Mayfair, one of the richest spots in London. Expensive watches, big money, people walking around without a care in the world. But on October 10th, 2024, someone was watching, and someone was ready to strike. A man in a dark jacket walks up behind a woman. He grabs her wrist and pulls. In one quick move, he's got the watch and he's running. It's all caught on CCTV. But what he doesn't know, the woman he just robbed is a police officer. And the watch? A fake planted to catch him. Seconds later, it's chaos. Plainclothes officers rush in from every side. One of them slips as he gives chase. Two men are caught right away. The one who ran, he's tracked down later. The trap worked. The gang took the bait. For weeks, police had been tracking a group who targeted people wearing expensive watches, mostly in central London. Rolexes, Patek Philippe's, Richard Mile's, anything that looked like money. They worked fast, usually in teams and always in the busiest places. The Met decided to turn the tables, so they sent in a team dressed like the kind of people the gang usually picked out. What happened next shut down one of the boldest robbery crews London has seen in years. They were after a £50,000 watch. But they walked straight into a police operation. This is the story of the Rolex Ripper Gang and how they got played at their own game. They weren't unknown to police. Jacob Harkett had already been involved in multiple thefts. Mohammed Naz was often seen alongside him. Janice Amiri and Adel Mohammed, both with histories of violent robbery, were part of the same circle. Together, they formed a crew that targeted the wealthiest parts of London, moving between Mayfair, Knightsbridge and Chelsea, always watching wrists, not wallets. Their aim was simple: high-value watches. Rolex, Patek Philippe, Richard Mille. They weren't interested in phones or bags. They wanted timepieces worth tens or hundreds of thousands. The type of item that could be sold quickly on the black market, sometimes within hours. This wasn't smash and grab. The group worked in teams. One would follow the target, another would get close. The third would strike. A fourth was often waiting nearby to create confusion or help with the getaway. They walked the same streets as their victims, dressed to blend in. Hooded jackets, designer trainers, phones in hand. But they weren't browsing shops. They were scouting wrists. In some cases, victims were distracted with questions. In others, they were simply grabbed, twisted, and forced to let go of what was on their wrist. One method involved wrapping a hand around the victim's arm, turning it quickly, and unclipping the watch before they had time to react. The entire thing could take under 10 seconds. CCTV later showed how quick the moves were, how normal it looked until it was already over. The Met Police had been tracking this pattern for months. There had been a sharp rise in luxury watch thefts, especially between July and October 2024. Many happened in daylight. Most followed the same pattern. A pair or trio of young men targeting someone leaving a bar, restaurant, or hotel. Victims were often wealthy tourists or business owners. Some were walking with friends, others were alone. It didn't matter. If you had a £100,000 watch on your wrist, you were a target. Harkett and Naz were linked to multiple incidents, but police lacked the final proof. Witnesses rarely saw faces. Victims were often too shocked to remember details. And when arrests were made, there was never enough to secure convictions. That changed on October 10th. After weeks of preparation, officers launched a sting. Undercover operatives would pose as a wealthy couple, wearing designer clothes and a replica rose gold Patek Philippe. The team hoped the bait would attract the right kind of attention. The gang took it. In one moment, the operation went from theory to reality. Harkett lunged, grabbed the watch, and tried to run. But the area was filled with plainclothes officers. What followed would bring the case to a turning point and expose the full scale of the gang's activity. By then, it was no longer about a single watch. It was about a team that had slipped through the system too many times. This time, they didn't. On the evening of October 10th, 2024, central London looked exactly as it always did. Busy, well-dressed, expensive. But behind the storefronts and luxury cars, plainclothes officers were in place. The targets were known. The trap was set. The operation centered on Berkeley Square, a hotspot for high-end robbery. Undercover officers, posing as a wealthy couple, walked slowly through the area. The woman wore a replica Patek Philippe rose gold watch. Her partner dressed the part too, tailored suit, confidence, and no hint of caution. They weren't bait in theory, they were bait in reality. Close by, surveillance teams were stationed in unmarked vehicles and on foot, waiting. Jacob Harkett spotted the pair first. Then came Mohammed Nas, flanked by the rest of the crew. They didn't hesitate. They followed, closing in as the officers turned into a side street. CCTV footage would later show the exact moment. Harkett reaching out, grabbing the watch, and yanking it clean off the woman's wrist. He didn't know what he'd just done. Almost immediately, the area came alive. Officers swarmed the scene. A plainclothes officer tackled Nas. Another moved for Mohammed. Harkett ran, bolting from the scene with speed that suggested experience, but he didn't get far. He was picked up shortly after by backup units already in pursuit. The footage didn't just capture the robbery, it showed the reaction. One officer slipped as he charged across the pavement. Another civilian froze as the chaos unfolded. For bystanders, it looked sudden, but every second had been planned. The fake Patek had dropped during the struggle. It was recovered at the scene, undamaged. The message was clear. They weren't just catching thieves, they were collecting proof. Harkett was taken into custody and admitted to robbery within days. Nas, who'd claimed during questioning that he'd simply been out for coffee and cigarettes, denied everything. The excuse didn't hold. Phone records, movement data, and surveillance placed him directly at the scene, in sync with the others. Worse still, his device showed recent internet searches for ultra-luxury watches. It was premeditated. Meanwhile, two other men, Janice Amiri and Adel Mohammed, were nowhere to be found. Both had fled, failing to appear at court dates. Arrest warrants were issued immediately, but their role in the robbery was already documented. CCTV showed them near the victim, watching, moving as a group, and reacting as the crime unfolded. The sting worked. The timing, the pressure, the setup, it all came together. The team moved in with seconds to spare. They'd turned a quiet October evening in Mayfair into the closing chapter of a long investigation. The Rolex rippers thought they'd found another mark. Instead, they walked straight into the arms of the police. After the arrests, the focus shifted. The robbery was done. Now it was about building the case, step by step, line by line. Police started with the phones. Each suspect had one. Each phone told a story. Messages, browser history, GPS data, all of it quietly revealing the work that went into a few seconds of violence. On Nasser's device, officers found searches from the day before. Richard Mille Watch Price UK, how to spot a fake Patek Philippe, most expensive watches Mayfair. This wasn't luck, it was preparation. His call log showed contact with Harkett in the hours leading up to the robbery. The two had messaged consistently for weeks. Short texts, mostly location drops and quick updates. Nothing obvious, but enough to map a pattern. The more they pulled, the clearer it became. This wasn't a one-time link-up. It was a partnership. Harkett's phone showed less, but not because he was cleaner, because he was smarter. He'd wiped messages regularly, deleted apps, and ran factory resets. But tech officers retrieved fragments from backups and cached data. Images of designer watches, mentions of Berkeley Square, even a saved map route starting from Shepherd Market, ending at the sting site. The surveillance footage filled in the rest. Officers had captured every movement on the night of the robbery and several hours before it. One camera picked up the group tailing the undercover couple through central London. No talking, just close tracking. A second angle showed the suspects posted nearby for over 30 minutes, waiting, watching, moving only when the couple did. The case against Amiri and Mohammed came from a different angle. Neither man was arrested at the scene, but both were caught on CCTV. One walked ahead of the officers, looping back in time for the strike. The other hovered by a shop front, keeping lookout. Both disappeared moments after the robbery. Their movements lined up perfectly with those already in custody. The footage showed teamwork, even without words. When police raided addresses linked to the group, they found clothes matching those worn in the footage, burner phones, and a notebook containing scattered references to watches, names, and streets. The notes didn't spell out the crime, but they didn't need to. Witness statements added weight. One local worker recalled seeing the group gathered hours earlier near Curzon Street. He recognized one of them, Harkett, from a few weeks back, loitering in the same area. Small details, but each one fit. The group didn't operate out of a base. There were no safe houses. Instead, they moved on instinct, used public places to meet, and relied on knowledge of the area. But the evidence left behind, digital, physical, visual, was enough to hold. By the time the files were handed over to prosecutors, the timeline was clear. There was surveillance, there was planning, there was execution, and now there was proof. Luxury watches weren't just a target, they were the target. High value, easy to carry, easy to sell. For gangs like this, it was the perfect crime. Their victims fit a profile: tourists, businessmen, couples leaving high-end restaurants. Anyone wearing something that shimmered just enough to catch attention. The gang didn't stumble on them. They waited, they followed, and they chose their moment carefully. Mayfair was prime ground: Berkeley Square, Shepherd Market, Park Lane, places where money moved quietly, places where people didn't look over their shoulders. That's where the gang worked. Streets filled with Bentleys, Rolexes, and doormen who looked the other way. These weren't smash and grabs. They were silent, sudden lifts. The kind of thefts that victims didn't even feel at first. It was always a team job. One would spot, another would follow, a third would take the watch. And if needed, someone else stood ready to distract or block the victim's view. It took seconds. No weapons, no shouting, just speed and confidence. In some cases, they moved close enough to touch shoulders. A light brush, a question, a glance. Just enough to break focus. Then the watch was gone, snapped from a wrist, hidden and passed on before anyone had time to react. What followed was confusion. Most victims didn't see who took it. Some didn't even realize until minutes later. By the time police were called, the gang was gone, slipped into side streets, phones off, clothes changed. They never stayed in one place too long. One moment they were outside a casino on Curzon Street. The next, loitering near the entrance of a private club. Always moving, always scanning. For them, it wasn't just about money, it was a routine. A job. Social media had already picked up the pattern. Clips from dash cams, doorbell cameras, and street CCTV started appearing online. One showed a man chasing a thief down Piccadilly after his Rolex vanished outside a bar. Another captured two men circling a woman in Knightsbridge, glancing at her wrist more than once before melting back into the crowd. The watches weren't kept long. Most were passed to middlemen the same day. Some went abroad, sold in Spain, France, even Dubai. Others were stripped for parts and resold quietly. Each one worth thousands, each one untraceable once it changed hands. And this wasn't the only crew. Over the past 2 years, London had seen a sharp rise in designer watch thefts. Police estimated over 300 reported cases in the West End alone. Many followed the same method: quick distraction, sudden grab, fast exit. The gang knew how to blend in. Trainers, slim-fit tracksuits, designer caps. Just enough style to pass as locals, but not enough to stand out. On CCTV, they looked like everyone else. That was the point. It was about control, knowing when to move, when to strike, and most of all, when to disappear. By the time the trial began, the evidence left little room to argue. Phone records, surveillance footage, and CCTV showed what happened in Berkeley Square, step by step. It was a robbery caught live, and the police were ready for it. Jacob Harkett pleaded guilty early. He was seen on camera grabbing the replica Patek Philippe from the female officer's wrist. His face, his actions, it was all clear. There was no way to dispute what the footage showed. Mohammed Nas denied the charge. He told police he'd been out for lunch, picked up cigarettes, and happened to walk through Shepherd Market. But his phone painted another picture. He had searched Richard Mille watches the day before. His messages placed him in close contact with Harkett for months. He was near the robbery when it happened. Prosecutor Henry Lardlaw described him as part of the team, watching and ready. The jury agreed. It took 3 days to find him guilty. Janice Amiri and Adil Muhammad didn't show up to court. Both were convicted in their absence. Bench warrants were issued. They had been seen nearby, linked to the group by location data and prior activity. Officers gave detailed testimony, explaining how the sting worked. They described the movements from Berkeley Square to the arrest point, how the operation was built to draw the group in without giving them a chance to walk away. CCTV showed every angle, the gang following the officers, the watch being grabbed, the plainclothes team moving in. Nas stood close. He didn't react. He didn't leave. All 4 men were represented. All were given the chance to respond. But the evidence didn't leave gaps. Each part of the case supported the next. Phone logs, locations, footage, and contact between defendants. This wasn't an accident. And by the time verdicts were returned, the court had no doubt about what they were dealing with. The final chapter in the Rolex Rippers case hasn't fully closed, but the courtroom is ready. Sentencing for Jacob Harkett, Mohammed Nas, Janice Amiri, and Adel Mohammed has been set for June 2025. That delay hasn't come from uncertainty about guilt. It's come from a system under strain. All 4 men were found guilty, or, in Harkett's case, pleaded guilty. Yet their punishments are still pending, more than 6 months after the verdicts. The delay reflects the growing backlog in UK Crown courts, a bottleneck worsened by years of underfunding, staffing shortages, and a rising number of complex criminal cases waiting their turn. The courts can't sentence what they can't process fast enough. In this case, there's also the need for pre-sentence reports. These documents assess an offender's background, the risk they pose, and whether any mitigating factors might exist. For a crime like this, targeted robbery, planned and executed in public, with potential ties to wider networks, judges want every angle covered before passing sentence. Bench warrants remain active for Amiri and Mohammed, who never showed for trial and were convicted in absence. Their time is still coming, if and when they're caught. But for Harkett and Nas, the outcome will arrive soon enough. What happens next will speak volumes. Because this isn't just about a few stolen watches, it's about public confidence, policing strategy, and whether harsh sentences genuinely deter the next crew eyeing a Rolex in Mayfair. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Some don't care about the sentence. They're not planning for 5 years down the line. They're planning for 5 seconds, the time it takes to grab a £100,000 watch and vanish into the crowd. The courts will hand down years. But for others, that risk? Still worth it.